Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive.
The climate clock, you know it's ticking, but figuring out how to actually make a difference.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're tackling today. We're going deep into youth climate activism with this book, Climate Sisters, Resisting Ecocide.
Okay,
And
interesting.
get this, it's got stories from literally every single continent.
Wow, that's impressive. It really shows how climate change, it's not some future problem anymore, right? It's here, it's now, and these young women, they're not just sitting back, they're becoming leaders.
Totally. And Climate Sisters, it doesn't shy away from the hard stuff here. Right off the bat, there's this stat. It says in 2023, almost 20% of the Earth experienced the hottest year ever recorded.
Wow.
2.3 billion people feeling that heat,
Yeah.
especially in Asia, the Americas. It's serious.
And it's not just about, warmer weather, right? It sets
Yeah.
off all these other things. Droughts in one place, floods in another, and coastal communities dealing with rising sea levels.
Exactly. This is happening now, not in some far off
Hmm.
future. And what I found really interesting is how Climate Sisters connects these climate impacts to this huge surge in youth-led movements, especially the growth of Fridays for Future.
Yeah, and the book really gets into why it's often young women leading the charge. In many cases, they're the ones hit hardest by the very things causing the climate crisis.
Right. It's like the book says, these systems that put profit over the planet and over people.
Exactly.
Makes you think, huh?
It really highlights how, for so many of these activists, especially the women in the book, climate change just makes existing inequalities worse, like access to education, job opportunities, even just being heard.
It's like this whole other layer of injustice. And that's where the book brings up intersectionality. I'll admit I had to kind of refresh my memory on that one.
Basically, it means you can't separate climate justice from social justice, from economic justice. It's all connected.
Okay, so we've got this global movement, this urgency for change, and Climate Sisters brings it to life through the stories of these individual activists, ready to meet some of these incredible women.
Oh yeah, let's hear their stories. Each one shows a different side of this global movement. It's fascinating.
Okay, first up, we're going to Mauritius. We're meeting Shaama Sandooyea. She's a marine biologist who took climate activism to a whole new level, literally. I'm talking about the world's first underwater climate strike. Yeah, imagine scrolling online and you see a picture of this young woman, scuba gear and all, holding a climate strike sign underwater.
Wow, that's powerful.
So powerful. And the book explains she did this to bring attention to seagrass, you know how crucial it is for absorbing carbon.
Right, right.
And it also highlighted her research with Greenpeace, showing how rising ocean temperatures, pollution, it's all threatening these ecosystems.
Makes sense.
And speaking of challenging the status quo, let's jump over to Argentina. Meet Chiara Sacchi. Her slogan is amazing. It's "Give us back our future."
I love that.
It just sums up how a whole generation is feeling, right?
So,
But Chiara, she's not just protesting, she's part of the slow food movement. So Climate Sisters talks about how Chiara and other young activists in this movement, they're pushing for food systems that are local, sustainable. They say industrial agriculture. It's a huge contributor to greenhouse gases.
sure.
Plus, it makes our food supply super vulnerable to climate change.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So they're tackling these massive problems by starting with something as basic as food. It's interesting.
It shows how much our everyday choices can impact the planet. And if we're talking about impact, our last climate sister for this section takes us to Indonesia. Delima Silalahi, she's fighting for indigenous land rights and forest conservation.
This story, oh my gosh, it really stayed with me. Imagine being so young and taking on a huge corporation, risking everything to protect your ancestral forests. That's Delima.
That's incredibly brave. It highlights how in so many places, it's the indigenous communities on the front lines of this environmental destruction, even though they've been caring for these lands for generations.
It's so true. And the book talks about how Delima's activism, it actually helped 6 indigenous communities get back over 17,000 acres of their land. This corporation was clear cutting for, you guessed it, palm oil plantations.
Of course. Palm oil, it's such a huge problem for deforestation in Indonesia, all over Southeast Asia. It's destroying habitats, releasing tons of carbon dioxide.
It just shows how environmental destruction and social injustice are two sides of the same coin, you know?
Absolutely.
It's amazing, right? One person's fight for their land, and it ends up having these global ripples.
That's what I took away from Climate Sisters is like all these individual stories, they're all connected like threads in this bigger tapestry of fighting back.
Totally. Like you were saying before, it's all interconnected.
Yeah, exactly. And the book really drives home this idea that that you can't fix climate change if you don't look at the systems, like the social systems, economic systems, political systems, that are causing the inequality in the first place.
Right, and they don't just talk about it in theory, they give you concrete examples.
Oh, absolutely. Like Chiara's work with food sovereignty, right?
Mhm.
The book actually quotes her. She says, food, it's not just about calories. It's about culture. It's about identity, our connection to the land. She wants a food system that respects indigenous knowledge, that helps small farmers, and makes sure everyone has access to healthy food and food that's sustainable.
Yeah, because the people most impacted by climate change, they often have the least power to change things. It's that disconnect.
Exactly. And that's why Climate Sisters really pushes the idea of you have to listen to the voices of those most affected by the climate crisis, especially women and girls from the global south.
Yeah.
It's about getting to the root of the problem,
Yeah.
not just putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms.
Right. And that's where I think collective action comes in.
For sure, for sure. And the book really highlights how these activists, they're using everything, social media, online organizing, these big global networks. They're connecting with each other, sharing strategies, building solidarity, and across continents. It's really amazing.
It reminds you that even with this huge, global crisis, we're not alone.
Exactly. And ultimately, that's the message of Climate Sisters. It's a story of hope and resilience. It shows that even though these young women are up against incredible odds, they're not giving up.
Not even a little bit.
Nope, they're fighting for their future. And it shows us that we can all do something to create a better world, a more just world, a more sustainable world,
Absolutely, yeah. And that's what's so great about this book. It doesn't just dump all the problems on you and then leave you hanging,
Totally.
It makes you feel like, okay, I can actually do something.
Right, like it's a call to action, but told through these amazing stories,
Yes, exactly. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Climate Sisters, what really stuck with you? What did you take away from it?
Well, one thing that really hit me is how the book makes it clear that there's no one right way to fight climate change.
Yeah.
You don't have to suddenly become vegan or chain yourself to a tree or something.
Right. Although, it's important.
Of course, yeah, those things have their place.
For sure.
But it's more about finding what works for you,
Totally.
Finding your own way to contribute.
Yeah.
The book even quotes one activist. They said, find your lane and go hard. And I love that, right? Whether that's getting involved in politics or changing your own lifestyle or supporting organizations, even just talking to your friends and family about climate change, every little bit counts.
Yeah. And that really gets at something I've been thinking about a lot. It's on the one hand, you see these amazing activists, they're making a real difference, but then you realize how huge this problem is, right? How much needs to change. It can feel kind of overwhelming.
Oh, absolutely. I think a lot of us feel that way. But you know what? Climate Sisters, it gives you this this really important message of hope. It reminds you that throughout history, big social change.
Yeah.
It's always started with ordinary people who said, no, this isn't right, and then actually did something about it.
It's true.
People who dared to imagine something different and then worked their butts off to make it happen.
Yeah, and reading these stories, it's clear that this generation of activists, they are not afraid to, shake things up, to challenge the people in charge, to demand better, and that's powerful.
It is incredibly powerful, and you know what? It's working. The book talks about how these youth climate movements, they've already had a real impact.
Really?
Yeah, they're changing the conversation about climate change, raising awareness, putting pressure on governments, on big corporations, and it's making a difference.
That's amazing.
It's not just them, though, right?
Right.
They're inspiring other people to get involved, too.
It's like that ripple effect.
Exactly. It all starts with these individual acts of courage, and then it just, spreads outward.
So to everyone listening, we want to leave you with this. What's your next step going to be? What can you do, even if it's small, to join this movement? Because Climate Sisters, it really drives home the point that we all have a role to play here, and that even small actions can have a huge impact, especially when we work together.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
The future really does depend on it.
It really does.
Yeah.